So I'm going to speak first to Dr. Amos. Now, we hear about eating disorders. It's quite a broad term. What are we talking about here? It
is a very broad term, and I'm not sure if that's very useful, the subtypes. So eating disorders, I like to talk to patients and say it's a disordered relationship with food, okay? And it's not necessarily just about what you eat and what type of food you eat. It's more about how you feel when you engage in those behaviours. So we find that there's a lot of emotional attachments with food. So it's a disordered emotional attachment with food, really, and that's what we would say eating disorder is.
And Dave, you've experienced this personally with anorexia. At what point did you realise there was an issue?
I think like really late, because I don't think that's that different. Like I think for a lot of mental health things, people around you have a much better perspective on what's going on than you do yourself. And it was like, it took me about 6 years to realise that I got a problem, and like even like 3 longer, so 9 years until I started treatment.
And what was that realisation? Did a loved one say, I think there could be an issue here, or...?
It was just simply depression. So I went to the doctors for like depression, and I remember very specifically that I said, look, I want to be treated for the depression, not the anorexia. And I kind of played the system a little bit to stay out of inpatient treatment. But a brilliant nurse told me something I thought was brilliant. And she said, look, you wouldn't expect your laptop to work if you don't charge it. Why are you expecting your brain to work if you don't feed it? And I think that's why like talking about things in really kind of down to earth, kind of common analogies is actually really useful.
Definitely. So did you approach this conversation with any family members, or...?
I still get a little bit uncomfortable talking. I suppose there's guilt. I think there's a lot of guilt talking about it because I put my family through a lot, but I'm very kind of comfortable now talking about it to other people. But yeah, I think I feel bad for what the family went through.
And that's why awareness is so important. There's a lot of shame attributed with eating disorders, and it's breaking down that barrier and having the conversation out in the open. I think that would be really useful I find that's useful to patients if they come in with their mum or their dad, because it is it's a young person's illness. Well, it can affect everyone, but we're seeing it quite spikes in the 12 to 25-year-olds at the moment, is having that non-judgmental conversation whereby we offer them information and they can digest it in their own time.
And when you say shame, it sounds a lot like you're taking responsibility for it rather than, if somebody has a cold, you have a cold, it wasn't your fault, you have the cold, you're not responsible for that. Would that be fair to say?
That is fair to say. It's because it has a physical ramification. So your relationship with food, people don't really see it as a mental health issue. They see it as a behaviour issue. Whereas we don't realise our emotions play into our behaviours, and we can change. That's what feeds back into the treatment. We look at what underlies the eating patterns, and we try and improve that. So it could be self-esteem, it could be stress, it could be so many different things that we try to target in terms of treatment.
Now, there's also been a rise amongst men. Do you think, Dave, men have a particular difficulty in talking about things that they might be struggling with? Could that be a reason?
I think generally, like, blokes find it quite difficult to talk about emotions. I was never given the emotional language. And we actually know that, like, one of the first diagnostic criteria of pretty much any mental illness is an inability to communicate, because the cerebral cortex, which plays a role in perception, thought and language, that starts shutting down. So I think that's really difficult. But I also think as well, I didn't realise that it was that much of a problem. I thought I kind of enjoyed it for a little bit of a while. I thought that I could give it up whenever I wanted. And also, something I think is so key is everyone talks about recovery as taking the anorexia away. No one talks about giving anything back. So everyone was saying, you've got loads to lose. Everyone was saying, instead of saying you were getting better, people kept on saying, we'll take that eating disorder away. And although it had massive implications, at the time, I enjoyed it. At the time, it was something that helped me make sense of the world. So, of course, I wouldn't engage in treatment because everyone was talking about what I've got to lose. No one talked about what I've got to gain.
That's really interesting. Also, you're a comedian, right? So do you think it's important we take... I know we've given you a topic that perhaps is a bit more difficult, but your aim is actually to change the tone around the conversation and make it less sort of doom and gloomy, is that it? And bring it more open so people feel more relaxed about speaking.
Couldn't agree more. Because I think, like, bottom line, you're going to make people who have experience of eating disorders feel less alone, but you can also educate and entertain people that are lucky enough to have no experience, because they actually think that more blokes suffer with bulimia than women do suffer with anorexia. And about 25% of people with anorexia are blokes. But, 50% of eating disorders are made up of EDNOS, which stands for eating disorders not otherwise specified. So things that don't fit into anorexia or bulimia. And that's about a 50-50 split of men and women. But generally, anorexia kind of gets a lot of the attention, but it's not only anorexia that is what an eating disorder is.